We do have minutes this week, and so we're asking members to take a look at that to see if they have any corrections or helpful additions to the minutes. Okay, sorry, before we go into the minutes, let us ask MP Miller if he could offer a word of prayer.
Let us pray. Father, we give thee thanks and praises for this opportunity in which we can meet here, the Joint Select Committee, to discuss the bill at hand. We ask that you be with our thoughts, our action, our deeds, and that whatever we decide here will be beneficial to your people, is our prayer in Jesus' name.
Thank you, Member Miller. Let me say welcome to everyone. This afternoon, we are blessed to have the Ecumenical Education Committee and the Jamaica Council of Churches here this afternoon for a presentation. Welcome. Before we call on you, we have to just do the preliminaries in terms of confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on Wednesday, April 13, 2022, and members would have gotten a copy. And so we will walk through on page 1.
Chairman.
Yes.
Given the low level of attendance and the fact that the minutes, I'm just seeing it now in the hard copy, maybe we could defer it for another time so that more members will be present.
I would suggest, how about if I allow you some time to read through? No, I'm saying, what if I allow some time to read through the minutes for those who haven't? That would be good in the meantime. All right, I'd like to put the minutes again to see if there are any corrections, any additions, any subtractions from the minutes, starting with page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7.
Yes, Chairman. Under number 2 on page 7, beginning with in relation to subclause 71G, it spells Dr. Brownberg name with a O, and I suspect it goes beyond that. In fact, it is in the first paragraph under 2, and I make this submission that wherever the O appears, it should be, it's a typographical, I take it, because the first page does have the correct spelling of her name.
Thank you, Member Brown. Duly noted. Page 8. Page 9. Okay. Thank you, Member Crawford. Duly noted. Page 10.
Yes, Chair. Under the second paragraph that starts, Senator Brown sought clarity. The second sentence, it starts, Dr. Anderson indicated that the practice of a teacher in a primary or high school was different from those that trained teachers that operated at a different, I think we're missing maybe level. The sentence is incomplete. And the sentence after that, he indicated that there had to be different standards as they operated at different levels. I believe maybe the word with should be included there to tie different expectations.
Sure. Thank you. Those corrections are duly noted. We ask for confirmation of the minutes. Okay, moved by Member Miller, seconded. Seconded by Member Hampton. Okay, so this afternoon, we will take the presentation of submission on the Jamaica Teaching Council bill from the Ecumenical Education Committee and the Jamaica Council of Churches. And so we invite you to begin your presentation.
Good afternoon, Minister and members of the Select Committee. Before I start our submission, may I just introduce you all to our delegation. Our leader this afternoon is the Most Reverend Howard Gregory, Archbishop of the Diocese of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, and Archbishop of the West Indies, the head of the Anglican Church, the denomination having the most schools in Jamaica, as our table and charts attached to the written submissions indicated. We apologize for the absence of Reverend Gary Harriott, who was here on the last occasion. He cannot be here today. He is replaced by another member of the United Church, Mr. Radley Reed, a member of the Education Commission of the United Church and the former chairman of the Public Education Committee of the United Church and an elder of his church. He's also an experienced teacher and former principal of Campion College. Next to me is Mrs. Grace Baston, the principal of Campion College, a noted educator in her own right, and she is the one leading one of our best performing high schools, or as our table indicated, secondary. And I am Ursula Khan, a member of the Ecumenical Education Committee. I'm here today as a member of the church and not as counsel, as I am by profession. You've all seen our written submission, and we also have a PowerPoint presentation. But before we start our submission, may I ask you kindly to allow our leader, Most Reverend Howard Gregory, to share some brief thoughts with you. Archbishop Gregory?
Minister.
Just water and plain. Where is it?
Minister and members of this joint select committee of Parliament, thanks for the opportunity to address you in these hallowed walls of this nation. The EEC and the JCC endorsed the development of the Jamaica Teaching Council. However, we have some concerns regarding the composition and operations as contained in the draft document. Unlike the various professional groups and disciplines such as law and medicine, which are single disciplines, education, we believe, is perhaps the most comprehensive in its philosophy, understanding of the human person, and the end to which we exist. In addition to the fact that it impacts the shaping of all other disciplines and the nature of human community. In fact, what is education without the disciplines of psychology, ethics, sociology, the social and natural sciences, and of course we include religion? To that extent, it must be influenced and shaped by other disciplines and the aspirations and goals to which a society directs its vision. While treated as tangential to education by some, religion is the matrix in which teaching as a discipline developed. Distinguished scholar and teacher-educator Professor Errol Miller, in his book Prophets and Virgins, traces the development of the discipline of teaching from its formation in Sumerian society through the ages, indicating the role religion has played in the development of teaching. Elsewhere, he has outlined the origin and development of education as the work of the church and trust schools, which were primarily the work of committed Christians at a time when churches were not able to have institutional incorporation, as happened subsequently. Up to the late 1950s, the church and trust schools were the primary owners and operators of high schools in this country. Today, the church still owns and manages over 800 schools at various levels in the land. I want to draw your attention also to the fact that of the teacher training institutions in this country, the majority are owned and managed by churches or trust institutions. St. Joseph's, the College of Mandeville by the Roman Catholics, Church Teachers College by the Anglicans, Bethlehem by the Moravians, Exed by the Methodists, Shorthood, which was started by church persons before incorporation was possible, and of course there is NCU, operated by the Seventh-day Adventists, and there's MICO, which is a trust institution. So we ask the question, are we now irrelevant or an anachronism? The Church, with all its diversity, continues to affirm the value of all human beings created in the image of God and deserving of access to all that makes for the full and wholesome development of each individual. A vital part of this development is that of the mind, the values, and the character of the individual. Equipment with the skills for a life of work and contribution to the building of the society, the development of critical thinking, and the development of a sense of social responsibility and duty. As a significant partner in the enterprise of education, we believe that as Church, we should have some input in the governance structure put in place to provide oversight for the educational system and so have a say in the operations of the proposed Jamaica Teaching Council and what is taught in our schools, who teaches in our schools, and the kind of learning environment which is created in them. There is, we believe, no monolithic value that underpins education that can stand alone and encompassed in the discipline of education. As Christian churches and as a part of a country which still affirms its values as primarily Christian, we believe that the Church, by virtue of its religious value framework and the testimony we believe of its legacy, it needs to have a continuing voice in those institutions, policies, and programs that are designed to shape the future of education. It is to that end that we make our submission to this parliamentary subcommittee. And also, in making this submission, we offer our support for the inclusion of other stakeholders in the composition of the Council in light of the position we take on the nature of education. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Archbishop. I believe, Madam Chair, that if there are any questions, as you indicated on the last occasion when we were here, all questions will come after the presentations. Hopefully that will still obtain.
Yes, please go ahead with the presentation, and then we'll ask questions.
The first thing we wish to mention on behalf of the Ecumenical Education Committee and the Jamaica Council of Churches is to tell this parliamentary subcommittee who we are. So the Ecumenical Education Committee consists of representatives of owners of denominational schools and trust schools in Jamaica. And it has been in existence since 2009. It meets regularly every month and considers matters on education in Jamaica. The Jamaica Council of Churches, member churches, and trusts own more than 35% of the public schools in Jamaica. Here we must mention that we've made an amendment to the PowerPoint. It is different in this respect from the written submission because our statistician went through the actual figures yesterday and asked that this be made. So we are saying that we own more than 35 and not 45 as in your written submission. And among them are some of the top performing institutions at both primary and secondary levels. The churches and trusts have invested heavily in these schools by making available property and land, by subsidizing plant and equipment in these schools, by heavy investment in personnel, by funding their schools that are assisted by government subsidy, that is the grant in aid, in order to enhance programs available in these schools, and additionally, by actively supervising their schools with their particular ethos in order to ensure that they deliver quality education to the children of Jamaica. And when you look at the PowerPoint presentations, members, you will see that we have interspersed in them photographs. And these photographs are all about children, because our main emphasis is on the development of children. As Archbishop indicated, we consider the JTC bill useful as it tries to put all matters concerning education, the practice and discipline of teachers in one document for the convenience of users. You know, when it comes to the financial parts, the laws that affect schools, they have to go to here, there, and everywhere looking for these things. But when it comes to just this, the registration and licensing of teachers, they're all in one place, which is useful. And so it is an undisputed fact that teachers, owners, and the government have an interest in the contents of such a bill. The representatives and owners of trust and church schools have carefully considered the bill, but they wish to have certain changes made to the text. Why? Because they want to preserve their interests as partners in education. So, some of the changes we want are not too difficult. And if I may refer you, members, to section 71G. G. 71G. That section mentions that the JTC Council should develop and deliver a code of ethics. And all we are saying is that after those words, we want you to add, this code of ethics shall be delivered in collaboration with a recognized teachers association and the owners of schools. We want to have a say in the development of this code of ethics, because what is ethics? Ethics deals with the concepts of behavior, and we really want to have a say in that. The next section we wish to have an amendment to is section 11(2)(b). And that section deals with the fact that the council will develop continuing professional development framework. And we want to add to that section that they should also consult with the owners of schools, as well as such bodies that are, in the opinion of the council, representative of the majority of teachers. Same thing. We want to see how the teachers are being developed, because we have to preserve our ethos. And now, I'm going to deal with the first schedule and the fifth schedule together, and skip some of what we had in the written submission to deal with at a later stage. Now, in the first schedule to the bill, this deals with the composition of the Board of Governors. And we contend that as owners of such a large proportion of schools in the island, the owners of the nominational schools should have 4 members on the board. And we reject totally the notion that one of them should be a licensed teacher, as stated in clause 1G of the first schedule. We also urge that the trusts as significant owners should also have 2 members on the board. Now, when I said in my opening that the AEC comprises representatives of owners of schools and representatives of trusts, I have to make this distinction that although the owners, the denominational owners and the trusts walk along a certain pathway, at a certain time, their missions differ. That is why they should have their representation, and so should we. Also, in the first schedule, the Minister of Clause 4.1 of the first schedule, this section here empowers the minister to appoint the chairman of the board, right, of the governors. And we strongly recommend that this section should be, the schedule should be adjusted to stipulate that the chairman should be appointed from among the members of the board who would best unite the several interests in the education sector, not just anybody. Because when you look at the composition, a lot of ex officio people are there. And we really want to have, as chairman, the one who will unite all the various sectors that will comprise this composition. Now, we found it very strange that Clause 4.2 of the same first schedule provided that the deputy chairman should also be appointed. And we say no. If you look at all the school boards, we don't have any such thing there. What we've had, and we're used to, not that because we're used to it we should have it, but it makes better sense to have that the deputy chairman should be elected and not appointed, elected by members of the board. And then with respect to the same first schedule, Clause 10.5, it deals with quorum. And the quorum there, the bill specified that 4 members of this quorum should be registered and licensed teachers. And we say no, this is impractical. And we had such a situation a few years ago where these people who were supposed to be there didn't turn up, and for nearly 9 months, nobody could have been appointed. And so this is impractical, and we recommend that it should be moved, completely deleted from this first schedule, Clause 10.5. We recommend, since we have asked for an increase in the number of members, we are asking that the quorum should be set at 8 with no conditions attached, because in the event of an equality of votes, the chair has a casting vote, and that can be inserted there too. I'm now going to skip the comments on the other 2 things I mentioned in the written submission and go straight to the 5th schedule. In the 5th schedule, we have before us what is the suggested composition of the appeals tribunal. And the suggestion was that the appeals tribunal should have a retired judge, and the 2 other members of the 3 would be teachers. And we say, no, we don't think that is a good composition. We think the composition should be the 3 members, yes, a retired judge, a representative of a professional teachers association recognized by the minister, and a representative of owners of church and trust schools. We want to be, when I say we now, I'm talking about the people who are making this submission. We want to be on this appeals tribunal. Of course, I haven't seen any provision in this bill about appeals from this tribunal, but since some of us present here know the law, this will then, if we object, anybody's objecting to anything like that, it will be judicial review. Okay, now I want to go back to Section 50. Section 50 has given us deep concerns. Some of you know already that I used to sit on this, I see Dr. Gordon somewhere here. I used to sit on this advisory body, and we have a church, we objected to something like this already. The old drafts, Section 73. And this is supposed to be an improvement on 73, but it still gives us deep concern because there's this possibility and high probability that if this provision is enforced, it can usurp the functions of the school board in its role as employer. And therefore, we insist that nothing in this bill should undermine or alter the existing authority of school boards. For example, some of the things mentioned in Section 50 may give rise to complaints which should properly be directed to the school board. And therefore, this has to be rephrased, reconsidered, because we are not prepared to give up our rights of authority as employer with our employees when it comes to infractions of things that affect our school. Now, if it was only about registration and licensing alone, I would imagine the JTC could deal with that. But then, in considering whether a person should be registered, or in considering whether a person should be licensed, the JTC is going to look into all of that. Is this person a fit and proper person? If not, if that person doesn't come straight up into the standard, they're prepared to put conditions. Okay, so therefore those things it may be, but once they leave and they go into the school system and they create any infraction there, it is a school board. And what we're going to find is people are people. People cherry pick all the time. Oh, I don't like the school board, so I'm going straight to the council. So that is what could happen, and therefore we want this section to be reconsidered and eliminated or drafted differently. Marky, we've gone through all this already with Dr. Gordon, but I'll still do it again. We do not want our school boards to be usurped in any way. Mark you, we haven't seen the education regulations yet. They were first formulated in 1980, and I think they have been worked on from time to time. I remember hearing one minister say that he's going to do it in part, but we never heard anything further. And in the meantime, we do not want the Jamaica Teaching Council to take over any functions which are properly ours in the school boards. Now, I know you all will ask questions, so we'll deal with the questions after. I have looked at sections 35 to 38 of the draft bill, and these are dealing with application forms that you have to apply in a certain form to be registered and a certain form to be licensed, etc. But the contents of these forms are nowhere in sight at this point in time. And normally, as two members present here can testify, regulations tell the public how things are to be done. And sometimes when you look at these forms in the regulations, you may find some of them very intrusive. Some of you may have looked at the PATH application. Do you have a fridge? Nobody answers it because they're not going to, nobody's applying because they're not going to answer these type of questions. And so we need to see the contents of these application forms. And therefore, regulations to accompany this act when it becomes an act should be given high priority so that the bill can come into effect as soon as possible and be effective. And so these are the, mark you, I've sat here and listened to some others making comments. I am not going to comment on them unless questions are asked of me or our delegation. But if I may just move on to conclude. We understand the teachers' need to protect their profession, and rightly so, because we see them as important partners in the delivery of quality education. We've always respected our teachers, and if I may just, with your leave, quote Oliver Goldsmith, a noted poet. He wrote The Village Schoolmaster many, many years ago. And this is what, I'm just quoting a piece of it, in describing the adulation of people to teachers. This is what he said. And still they gazed, and still the wonder grew that one small head could carry all he knew. And this still happens. Everybody respects their teachers. But to allow owners to be on this teaching council with substantial representation is not going to affect the teachers. It's not going to do them any harm. It will enhance the profession. And so, in our appendix, which is attached to the, and also, right, I am not a statistician, and Mr. Reed here can answer any questions. Where's Mr. Reed? Mr. Reed here, he is a statistician. He will answer any questions members may ask on some of these, the table and the various charts. And so, I may just close now by thanking the Honorable Minister and the Joint Select Committee for this opportunity to address our concerns on the Jamaica Teaching Council. And we urge this Select Committee of Parliament to consider favorably and support our stated concerns in an effort to preserve and strengthen the partnership between government, owners of schools, and the teaching profession. And I will just close by just these last words. We live in times we did not choose. We are all, government, church, and teachers, in a joint partnership to lift the nation to its better self. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is that the totality of the presentation?
This is the totality. Of course, I did not mention the tables. Where are the tables? Please put back the tables. The table is at, this table sets out all our schools. And you see we have 665 schools of various categories, and the categories are all mentioned. They're not called high schools, they're called secondary schools. This is comprised by Mr. Reed, and he will answer any questions anybody wishes to ask. The chart next to it tells us, hold on, it is named church schools, but I'm sure Dr. Morgan is going to be upset that, The trusts are there, but the name of the chart, it doesn't include chart, but it doesn't include trust, but it includes church and trust schools. But the trusts are there too, and all the various schools they have here in various colors. And the type of schools is on the second chart. And they speak for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, members. Okay, we have member Hamilton. Yes, okay, go ahead, member.
Thank you, Chair. Mrs. Khan, thank you for the presentation.
Yes.
I want to go back to the first schedule where you mentioned the appointment of chairman and the issues you have with that particular clause. You indicated that it is the preference of the committee for the chairman to be appointed from among members, but for the deputy chairman to be elected by the same members of the board. What exactly is the difference? I just want that clarification.
Well, the bill, when it comes to the chairman is appointed by the minister. We have no objection to that fact. All we said was not just any of the 23 members stated or the 20, how many we want to add 3 more, 26 members. Not just anyone, but the one who the minister will consider a uniter. You see, because when you look at the composition, you will see there are many ex officio members there. So we don't really want too much of that kind of thing. We want to have the person who will be able to unite. Because you're going to suppose we're going to have 3 different categories. I think we're going to have 2 parents too. We're going to have university representatives, and I don't remember exactly in my head all the people, but we want the minister to appoint the very person who he or she thinks will unite. But when it comes to the deputy chairman, the bill, it suggests that he or she should also be appointed. I suppose it didn't say appointed by whom. The draftsman didn't say that. But we don't really want him appointed, or her. We would like him to be elected, because that is the kind of circumstance that in the school system we're used to. All school boards have things like this. The chairman is appointed by the owner, and the deputy chairman is elected. So why the change? Unless it was a mistake.
But in clause 4.2, when it speaks to the deputy chairman, it says the members of the board shall appoint the deputy chairman from among its members.
But I don't know what I don't know what you're looking at, but the point is that this as a member of the joint advisory, what do you call it now? The Jamaica Teaching Council advisory body. I was sent this particular draft on the 9th of March by the ministry to me, and my copy has that. If it is not so, fine.
It's page 62. I don't know if we have two different copies, Chair. Do we have two different copies?
Okay, let me just find it again. What is it? 4-2. From a member. No, listen, this is what I have, member. The members of the board shall appoint, oh, you're saying, yeah. I see what you mean. Well, probably elect is a better word than appoint. Because how does anybody appoint anything without any kind of voting or so? Anyhow, maybe it's a word that could mislead, but the word elect will never mislead anybody.
All right, I'll call on Ms. Anastasia Gordon-Jones for a comment.
Thank you, Chairman. Just want to indicate that we have noted the word and we intend to change it to reflect elected.
Very well, thank you, thank you. Okay, that's good. Yes, is there any member? Member Hamilton, I think it is Hamilton, right?
Yes.
I haven't seen you in years, so I can't see from so far. Is there any question you wish to ask?
Yes, there is one other question that I wanted clarification on, and it was in relation to Section 50 complaints, where you spoke about the entity usurping the responsibilities of the board. Under Section 50, it speaks to
50.
Page 45.
Wait, hold on, I can't find it.
A person who alleges that a registered teacher, a licensed teacher, an instructor has failed to comply with the conditions imposed on the registration of a teacher, has contravened the professional standards referred to in the legislation, is deemed not a fit and proper person, or has contravened or failed to comply with a provision of the Act. I am just seeking information as to what currently obtains and whether the school board would be enforcing compliance with these specific requirements that are now included. Or maybe I should ask another way, what particular section or what particular clause is the committee not in agreement with? Because I would imagine that the board would not be enforcing quite a few of these conditions.
Well, as I understand the licensing and the registration and licensing of teachers, the council will then be putting conditions on certain people. And as I said earlier, if it is a breach of condition that they have put, yes, but then you see, after they leave, after they're registered provisionally or however, and they go into the school system, then if whatever it is they're doing adversely affects their relationship with their employer, then who has jurisdiction? And therefore, that is why I mentioned cherry picking. They may very well say, okay, I don't like the board, let me just go to the council. So all I'm saying is that this thing is not clear. When we first looked at the old Section 73, we had the same thing. We objected in 2018 to that very concept. It is still not clear enough as to what jurisdiction the council has with disciplining of teachers, and their disciplining should only be with respect to registration and licensing. It shouldn't be anything that happens in the school system, Because anything that happens while they are employee must be dealt with by the school board.
I can appreciate that, Mrs. Khan, but based on the section here, the clauses, they are very specific, and they're specific to certain sections of the legislation. From my reading, I don't understand it as usurping the power of the board, because I would imagine that the board would have their own standards and codes and ethics that each teacher would be adhering to from the local level. Maybe my understanding is incorrect. I don't know if the CPC could assist here, because this is very specific. So it speaks to fit and proper as it relates to section 34, and it speaks to professional standards as it relates to section 10. So it's very narrow in its application to me.
Chair, if I may, perhaps we should look also at clause 51, which 51,
60 or 50?
51, just below, on the same page, which indicates that upon receipt of a complaint under 50, the council shall, based on the circumstances and particulars of the complaint, then refer that complaint to either the ministry or the board. So we should consider whether this provision is sufficient to deal with the concerns that the ECC may have or has.
Yeah. I think Mr. Reid would like to answer this question.
Member, I would think as the employer, the complaint should first come to the board, and as the board sees it necessary, the board may have to refer it to the council, not to go to the council before and then come back to the board. I think that would be a better way of dealing with such complaints.
But Mr. Reid, that has been a large part of how things operate now, and it's not working very well, some would say. So if we're trying to do things differently, and more, it may require some change, because that's the process now, and in some cases it's not working. What is a reason to not try this method, other than the fact that that is how we have done it before?
It's not just because how we have done it before. The board is the employer, as you know. It's a board which hires and fires at this stage. That's what is in the regulation. So I would think if there is some breach, it should come to the employer first, and depend upon the nature of the breach, then if necessary, the board will refer it to the council. If it is a matter which the board can deal with, the regulations are there for the regulation 1980 tells you exactly what should be done as far as a teacher is concerned.
What of the fact that it's not currently working very well right now? What of that fact, in your opinion?
I don't agree with you that it isn't working very well. You might have a few, but certainly not the majority, I think.
But also, Mr. Reid, I would imagine that there are certain complaints or certain persons who would refuse to complain to a board because they may not feel comfortable doing so and would rather a third-party intervention in that entire process. Would you be able to appreciate that as an element of what is being included here?
Yes, but it's the same thing Mrs. Khan referred to, cherry picking. They might feel, I don't want to go to the board, which is on spot.
But with legitimate reason, though. with a legitimate reason to not want to go to the board. Those persons who have a complaint, but for whatever reason would be fearful of approaching a board. Yeah. How do you treat those currently?
You'll always have persons, in a practical way, have persons who might not want to come to the board. But of course, in life, that's the way of life.
Yes.
It's what would be the proper mode. That's what I am dealing with. What is the proper mode?
And also, they cannot reject the power, the responsibilities and obligations of the employer. They can't do that. That is why I mentioned cherry picking. They don't want to do it.
But in that case, wouldn't as it says, the council would refer it to the board? If the council looks at the complaint and it's outside of its remit, it's going to send it back to the board, down to the board. So you have flexibility all around, right? Yeah.
Well, Minister, you'd have some very trivial matters going to the council. I'm certain that will occur. Very trivial matters going to the council, and time wasting for the council, and depending on how many, once people see this is a route I can take, because they are not, the board is in the local situation which understands and knows exactly what is going on, and then do something like that.
Mm-hmm. Minister, may I speak, please?
Sure, please go ahead.
Just having listened to this session and a previous one wonders, what are the limits to the teaching council in terms of the responsibilities that it takes on? Can it handle all of these complaints, with all the other things that it has to do, and the number of teachers in the profession, can it handle realistically every concern that may arise at the local level from a teacher? And I just wonder whether we are setting up ourselves for something that cannot work in terms of the number of things that the council is taking on to itself.
Yes. Additionally, Minister, jurisdiction is a legal concept. And as my two colleagues among your members will tell you, there's this doctrine of subsidiarity. You go to the lower level first, and then you go to the higher level. You don't go to the higher level for the higher level to send things down to the lower level. That is a principle of law.
Okay. Member Brown, is it on the same topic? On the same topic? Okay.
I think it was Mrs. Douglas Sherland who pointed out that we need to read 50 in the context all the way down to 53. That at 50, it says they may, doesn't require that they must and they shall make the complaint. It provides an opportunity for the council to be a reception base of the complaint. And then 51 says, if you get that complaint under section 50, there are some options for you all the way down to 53. So if it said you shall complain, I could understand Mr. Reid saying that then all of these complaints would come to the council. But it is an option, it's a discretion, and it's not that all complaints must go. And I assume that the existing arrangement where you go to the boards, to the employers, would be the one that is followed. This is not saying the council must get all the report. That's my...
Chair, I was going to the same clause, and my concern would, I understand.
Who is that?
That's what, yeah. I understand when an owner or an employer wants to be, I can understand and appreciate when an employer wants to be the first port of entry in dealing with any infraction or any allegation in regarding its employee, and quite rightly so. But when I look at this, what 50 and 51 is trying to ensure in my mind is that there is a recording going to the council in the first instance as a safety net. But 51 speaks to the referral back to the employee to allow the employee to deal with the intricacy, the employer to deal with the intricacy in relation to the case. Now, it also provides the opportunity for it to be escalated back to the council if the employer does not deal with it. But the recording of the infraction would be first established by reporting to the council. And so, when I look at it, I further understand what 50 and 51 is seeking to treat it. And I appreciate in the first instance where as an employer or as the owner, you're seeking to be the first port of entry. So I understand that. But when you read in the context of what 50 and 51 is saying, they are supportive of each other. Chair, if I may, since I'm on the floor, and it's good when in these situations you're really hearing from the owners. Because when you hear about schools, you hear about principals and you hear from students, but you hear from the owner. And I can say, I went to a school that was owned by a church, which segues me into a little bit about what you're saying in regards to 7.1J in terms of the code of ethics. And being from a school that was owned by a church, I can understand and appreciate the entrenched philosophy. But I think it's important if you could expand a little more in terms of why is this so important that you are consulted with or participate in such an important decision. Maybe you want to use the opportunity to expand on that importance.
Sorry, just to respond, if I may, to the concern. One of the things I was saying earlier is that the profession by itself does not, in thinking about teaching, the profession by itself does not have a philosophy that captures all that the various perspectives and disciplines bring to bear on our understanding of the human person. It is not to say that there isn't anything ethical present, but what informs the ethical practice, the approach to ethics, and the kind of culture and the sort of values that we want to communicate. Because it's not just a question of the teacher passing or dealing with their personal ethics. It is the ethics that inform who we are as a people. It's ethics that is founded on various, we are not a sort of monolithic society in terms of religion or values, but that which represents the broad cross-section. And we believe that in shaping the ethics that informs the profession, and which actually happens, as I pointed out earlier, we are heavily invested in teachers' colleges at this moment, more than anyone else. And there are values which are imparted to the teachers, but also values which inform the perspective from which we approach education, and which, in the structuring of the very teaching environment, there are some of these ethical values which we seek to communicate, and which we feel are still important. We are in a changing environment, values are changing, but we feel we still have a place there in helping to shape the values. And I would say more, in terms of where we are as a society today, we may be doing a good job in fitting persons for the workplace, and some would disagree. but the extent to which we are working on things like character and character formation, we're not doing a particularly good job because we're not addressing seriously in our educational system those ethical values that help to shape character and personality.
Reverend Gregory, would you welcome other groups at the table in deciding on ethics? Is it okay?
Sure, and in fact, in our schools, our faculty, we don't insist on our teaching faculty being of any one orientation. I don't think any of our denominations push a single line, but we certainly want to see that the religious dimension is part of what informs, not doctrine, but the particular perspective. So we're not doctrinaire in what we do. And if you look even in terms of what is happening in terms of religious education in the schools today, as you know, Minister, it is not teaching denominational positions. It is exposing persons to religious phenomenon and religious experience. Because without that, some of our youngsters exposed to all kinds of crazy ideas will embrace them. We want them to understand what is healthy, what does health religion look like as against. So it's a way of bringing to bear other perspectives. It's reflected in our teaching, in the composition of our faculty, and we bring those things to bear from our background, the multiplicity of views, the philosophies that we bring to bear more and more, as well as helping our students to understand, the teachers to understand that we are in an environment where the values and the ethics are changing, but still helping them to question some of those things, and not just to say that we have to take this particular position. That's my experience, and that is certainly the approach which I know most of our denominations take.
Hold on one second, just to continue on that. But Reverend Gregory, it seems as if you're limiting that, though. You'd only want us to add a recognized teachers association and the owners of schools as the entities that are at the table in doing the code of ethics. It's not. I mean, you didn't say add, other associations. You were specific in who you wanted at the table.
Oh, you're thinking in terms of the appeals. It's just the...
Reverend Gregory, this is in relation to Section 7, the Code of Ethics established by the Council.
Okay. I see what you... Okay.
The chair mentioned the specific inclusion of recognized teachers association, but my proposal, Chair, would be for there to be general consultation. I don't think the committee would object to that.
So, yes,
as opposed to just making a specific inclusion of teachers associations, I'm saying a general consultation to develop these code of ethics. Would that be more acceptable?
Yes, and in terms of, I think where I ended in terms of our commitment to stakeholders, everybody being a part of it, what we are concerned about, and sometimes we see it when some of these bodies are set up, that we are sort of considered somewhere along the line, that we would like to see the church and the trust, the profession and the church being included, yes. That's what we want to see.
Member Crawford?
Chair, before member, just on a follow, because outside of the consultation of these standards and codes of ethics, I'm going a little further by insisting that there is the promotion of these standards. Today we are having challenges that I never had in school about the way I dress, my hairstyle, conforming to the rules of the school. And so outside of setting the standards, what I'm encouraging is that there is the promotion and the continuous education around these standards. And I believe as owners, there is a fundamental responsibility to ensure that, this agenda is being pursued. Because as you have indicated, Reverend Gregory, we are living in a dynamic, changing environment. So I'm suggesting and encouraging that there's the infusion of this promotion of these standards also.
Thank you very much for that. Sorry.
This is not in the bill itself, right? You're talking about what we should do.
Yeah, I'm talking generally because, you know, a bill sets, a law sets minimum standards, but it does not preclude us from trying to seek to promote other areas that can, you know, be supportive of the agenda.
I don't think anybody disagrees with that, but you're not suggesting that it should be in the bill.
No.
Very well. Thank you.
No.
I'm afraid we didn't get your name, though.
Oh, my name is Gail, Cavan Gail.
Oh, okay, we met you on the last occasion, but I'm too blind, I'm not seeing too well so far. Right? Thank you.
Minister, if I may just respond, I say, there is a sense in which we still want to promote certain values. And one of the things that I've looked at is the program that Campion College has on character formation. And I was certainly at Church Jesus College just 2 weeks ago, and again talking about how the college is focusing on character formation. At the same time, how we engage and communicate some of these things, because we need to recognize that in our society today, as soon as you begin to talk in terms of any specific value orientation, there are those who oppose. You know, you say there's the issue of hairstyle and tattoos and what have you, and you wonder whether persons want any particular discipline with students. But then when they get into the workplace, if they are being prepared for the workplace, they can't appear in the workplace dressed and carrying themselves in a certain way. So just a notion of discipline is something that most of us don't want to hear, but it's part of what I think we attempt to do in the school, but not to just impose any one discipline. Thank you.
Member Crawford.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your submission and the contribution of your organization. I want to bring your attention to this section in your submission which speaks to composition of Board of Governors, to the first part that says the owners, your first recommendation, the owners of denominational schools should have 4 members on the board. I just want a clarification. When I look at the table in your appendix, there are at least 7 different denominations. Is it that you're saying each of these 7 should have 4? Or if not, who or how would we determine which 4 gets a seat at the table from the 7 to avoid conflicts?
Okay, well, you remember that this submission is made on behalf of the EEC, that is the Ecumenical Education Committee, and the JCC. One night somebody called me and mentioned something about an umbrella of what do they call it? Okay, leave that. All right. Okay, the point is this too. The thing is, between the EEC and the JCC and the trust, we will appoint 4 members. It is not at 4 for each one. No.
Recommend. You
can't. We recommend 4. That's true. Thank you, Senator Lambert.
And you'll recommend as a unit, the group?
Yes, 4. But what the main point we were making, though, is because in the draft bill, we had 3 members. But it was, a condition was there that one of them should be a licensed teacher. And we really don't see why. Because the teachers have 6 already, and they have university, and they have I think they have more than 6. So I really didn't count.
Could I say, Mrs. Khan, at the board level, for schools that are trusts and denominational schools, their boards there As far as I can remember, as far as I know, it only has one member from the government on those boards. So it seems as if you already, at the board level at the school, you have an overweighting in terms of what you can do at the board level and at the schools. To want increased membership at the council as well, it would just seem to tip the scale a little bit much.
Yeah, that is true. At board level, government only has one. But this is a different composition. This is the teaching council. This deals with licensing and registration. And they're also giving themselves power to develop ethics and the continuing professional framework. We just want to be in that too. You know, I don't know how much, well, you know that the world is just one place in one sense. Everybody knows everything, copycat everything. Do you know that in America, some parents are suing the school because the teachers themselves are teaching this thing about gender eradication and whatever it is they're doing. And they tell the children, don't tell their parents, we can't allow these kind of things to go on. How can we develop a society when we have things like that? No. Hold on. We are not talking about a deviant anything, you know, but we are saying this, we have to have things in our schools of which we are the owners that will not interfere with our ethos.
Well, can I just pick up on the point? I know many times in this session you've referenced the fact that the ECC, the JCC trust schools are major owners of schools in Jamaica, major owners, operators, and you've laid out a couple of sheets with tables showing us by denomination how many are owned and so forth. You know, I don't deny that the church has been in the education sector for a very long time, many decades, and is an important partner in education. But in presenting this information about the number of schools that are owned, I think it would be good as well to recognize the significant funding that comes from the taxpayers of Jamaica to all these schools that you reference. So there's some balance when we speak about the significant ownership of the church of various schools.
Yes, Minister, but you know what I have discovered over the years? That there's very little distinction being made between a government school and one that is grant in aid. Somehow or the other, the personnel mix the two up. It's true, who pays the taxpayers? Who consolidate? Who contributes to the consolidated fund? But the people of Jamaica. So if the government is giving us some kind of help, and they've only been doing it since the 1950s, probably some of us weren't even born then, right? But what is wrong with that? They are helping, but we do, I don't want to use any bad language, we also contribute heavily to our schools. We have plant, we have equipment. Do you know what government gives?
Mrs. Khan, there's no denying that. I'm not arguing against that at all. I've recognized that the church has been extremely important in the history of Jamaica's development and of the education sector. But I'm just saying that in presenting your data and the emphasis that you brought to the ownership of these schools, also just to balance the scale, it should be recognized that there is significant funding that flows to church schools and trust schools as well.
We don't deny any such thing. We agree and we accept it. You know, when I used to be PTA president of one of our schools, we built a big hall, a huge hall, It cost the earth. Do you know how much money government gave? 65,000. And we had to find all the other thousands. So we fund schools heavily. Thank you, Minister.
Senator?
Yes. Thank you, Minister. My question is based on, well, first of all, thank you for the presentation and the perspectives. Where you say contents of application forms for registration, licensing, and authority to teach, sections 35 to 38, I want to agree with you, but I would like some guidance from the team here, where the suggestion is that sections 35 to 38 belong in the regulations versus in the bill itself. Could you help to guide me on that? So that's the first question. And then the second question is,
if I may answer the first question immediately. We are not saying that these sections should be in the regulations. What we are saying is the contents of the application forms are normally in the regulations, and we need to see what they are, because some of the questions being asked in forms
okay. I misunderstood, because the way it's written, where it says the contents of those sections are normally in the regulations, I wondered. So
yes,
thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
So my second question is a little bit more abstract, but you're here today as a captive audience, so I will take the opportunity. Referring back to what Senator Gale said earlier about, for example, general regulations around things such as hair, and we know there's a current situation with a particular high school with the grooming of hair, and the poor minister here has really tried to say, you know, you shouldn't be regulating hair. Children should be allowed into school because it's an institution. The idea has been floated that the teaching bill should include something about the issue of what would allow for teachers to have that authority. In your opinion, do you think it's something that should be legislated, for example, in this bill?
Teachers have their own opinion. Would you like to answer that?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand. The question is, are you suggesting that, are you asking whether something to do with things like deportment and what have you should be included in the bill?
No, not necessarily deportment, but the authority of teachers to act on issues of deportment, since schools are not seemingly listening to the advice given from the ministry. Some persons are saying then it should be regulated, because if it's in the law, then you have to act according to law. What are your thoughts, given that you all are owners of several schools?
My own position is that I don't know that some things need to be framed in that way. Because today it's here, tomorrow it's probably going to be whether you can wear slippers or shoes. But so I think that there has to be some sort of discretionary thing and a kind of relationship between the minister and the principal and the teaching staff to work through certain issues as they arise. And it also reflects the nature of our society as well.
What if it keeps coming up over and over again? Does it then at a point you stop and say, let's legislate?
My own feeling is that I don't think we should legislate because, again, I'm saying, given the way in which our society is structured, those of us who went to school in my time, a church school, not an Anglican, but a church school, I mean, just as soon as I started to grow a little thing that looked like a mustache, I had to shave it. And I couldn't go to school with that because that was what they were talking about. We're long past that kind of thing. Today we're talking about whether here or what have you. Tomorrow it will be something else. I just feel that we don't need to codify certain things, but we need to have some way in which, as issues arise, as I'm suggesting, other issues going to arise, that the minister and the schools should be able to work through those issues.
And yeah, minister they have tried, but the schools
Member
are not
Miller?
listening.
Member Miller and then Member Brown.
Don't codify it.
Thank you. I've heard the comment from the good Rev. Gregory in terms of what he said, but I know for a fact that minister has been saying certain things in that regard, and the school itself is not adhering to what the ministry is saying. So how do we strike the balance? And I think it's a very good question that Member Rodriguez stated in terms of, do you believe where you sit that is something that needs to be regulated in terms of policy direction and should be in the legislation? Because there are certain bulletin, there are certain pronouncements from the minister and the ministry, and the plant itself is not adhering to that. So how do we strike the balance where that is concerned without depriving a child of a right to be educated? Because it could be argued as well that back in the days when you had moustache, my dad used to say it's dirt, rub off those dirt, right? But back in those days, as I heard one of my members stated, that you had afro. You know, you can't wear afro now. You know, so times and things change. So how do we strike the balance and at the same time having a good deportment for school?
I agree that there needs to be regulations. My reservation is about attempting to codify every issue that arises from time to time. There needs to be certainly some regulation that speaks to whether it's and I believe there's some way in which some of it is captured, the authority of the minister in relation to the school and certain things. One could address it, for example, in terms of, and I believe there's something there in the code in terms of how long can you keep a student out and for what reason, that can address it. But to address something like the hair and I think that it's getting into the minors, which I don't think the minister, we need to codify that.
All right, thank you, Reverend Gregory. Member Brown?
Thank you very much, Chair. A couple of questions. So let me thank the church for the century of education to the people of the country, and more so to those who were emancipated. And as a product of a Methodist primary school and an Anglican high school, which probably is the reason why I'm so confused. But yes, I want to thank the church for its contribution to education, not just for decades, but for a century. A couple questions here. I understand you to be saying that you'd like the committee to make sure that the role of school boards are pronounced in the legislation relative to the role of the council. That's not one or the other, but just prescribe where the boundaries should be. Is that the case?
We would agree with that assessment, definitely. Thank you.
So that's for the committee to look at. Can I take you to 7.1J on page 10 of the bill? The section that came up about professional standards and codes of ethics. And I'm going to say something that the church may not be happy with, but let me say it because it's stuck in my mind from the 70s. There was a time when a male teacher could get somebody pregnant and still keep the job, but a female single teacher could be dismissed for being pregnant. And I recall that in a church school. Granted, my daughters have been to that school since. I have nothing against that school. Do you think that the code of ethics, whatever comes out from the council, should be something approved by the parliament, which would allow for greater stakeholder, whether the your committee, being on the council or otherwise, but that the product of that code of ethics should be approved by the parliament, since it could have far-reaching implications, whether it's ankle-length dress uniform, whether it's the hairstyle, and I remember Mr. Richards in JC saying, "Boy, you have naughty hair." I've never forgotten that from the 60s into the 70s. So these things impact people long term. So should the code be approved by the parliament in the way that Senator Gale would say the labor relations code was approved? Because this would be could be fundamental in its implication.
Minister, if I may, I would think that that is precisely what would be helpful. What we are suggesting, though, is that the preparation of that which would be passed, presented to Parliament for its consideration, would involve our input. That's what we're asking for.
Yeah. And next question is, you raise the issue of ownership, and I'm not one who is quick to jump in defense of owners, but given the investment and the role of the church in education, I'm prepared to support a balanced chairman, where it's not just the government money going into education, because really a lot of money come from church-going taxpayers. So that whichever way we go, there is that investment. But let's see it as Jamaica investing in education through the owners, through the state. Are you of the view that this bill, as it is, could impact that partnership adversely, and you would like to see that balance which has taken us thus far maintained in going forward?
I think that, as we indicated earlier, we support the thrust of the bill, and we think it's the right direction. But we just feel that there are some things that need to be approached perhaps differently or modified that would maintain the balance. I must say, Senator Lambert, that we are concerned sometimes about how that balance is maintained, because the way in which the balance has shifted, for example, the term public schools, for example, was used at one stage to speak of grant-aided. Now it's being used in another way to include all our schools and to include, for example, all our funds that come in, whether it's PTA or whatever, or there are some changes taking place. But also we find that at times the consultation as a partner, we insist that we are partners, and all we want is to be treated as partners. So there is engagement, there's discussion that we not hear after the fact or when something has been established already, to simply be brought to hear that this has happened. Just to be partners along, to keep that relationship.
And given is it 35 or 45, whatever the number is, it's significant. You would be a major minority shareholder, whether it's 35 or 45 in the education process. And looking at some of the results, a comment made by Ms. Khan earlier about some of the best schools, best results coming from the church schools. Do you think that if there's a reduction in your role in the partnership, it could lead to a reduction in the quality of educations in the church, or a quality of investment in education by the church?
Member, I fail to see what this has to do with this particular bill right now, honestly. I don't want you to go down a certain path and take us off the course of discussing this bill.
I must advise on consent when this bill comes. And I want, for my purpose of voting in that place on a Friday, to get a sense of what are the implications for the education process if the church has a reduced role in it. And that's why I'm asking the question. It's not just because that will determine our vote.
But I don't think the bill is seeking to reduce the role of the churches. I don't see that in this bill. It's just a speculation, and I
It
don't
may
think
not
we
be
should
the
be
intention, but a
speculating.
dysfunctional outcome could very well be that, which is why I'm asking the question. So if we allow the question to be answered, to get a sense from the
Member
church
Brown,
where
it's
they're
a very hypothetical question. It sounds like you're going down a particular path.
Minister, the churches will continue to make its contribution. There are some things that can facilitate the work we do, but we will continue to make our contribution as best as possible. Okay.
You get an answer and I get an answer, but we mustn't just censor every question that is asked, because there's a reason for the question being asked.
Because it's you, that's why.
Thank you, Member Brown. Thank you so much. Member Braham.
Good afternoon, Bishop and your team. My apologies for... Well, he's Bishop as well. I don't know, Bishop, they think I've given you a title that you don't deserve. Nevertheless. I am not a part of the team. Right? But I apologize for being late. So I missed the actual formal presentation. And indeed, you might find the question, though more relevant, may not be exactly within your remit. And if you think it is, then you may tell me. But I wanted to ask the schools, insofar as any school, whether church school or not, they have a slew of persons. Let's take coaches that are involved in preparing students, not PE teachers. Some of them are PE teachers, but some of them are hired specifically to prepare the students for particular events. And indeed, they spend a lot of time and they have lots of influence on the students. From your reading, or maybe Mrs. Khan, do you think that the bill covers these persons, particularly the coaches, or intend to cover it?
Well, Senator, I am not in the school at all. I wonder if Grace, Mrs. Baston should answer that question.
And I'm going to answer in a most inept way, because when I look at the categories, the types of registration or licenses that may be given, I remember reference to somebody who can, what is it referred to at the front? In other words, it's not all about classroom teaching. There's instructors, and I assume that they would fall under that. Yes.
You think that's ought to be the case, that those persons would be covered under the bill as well?
No, I think the work the coaches do, especially people who are just brought in for teaching table tennis, the kinds of requirements that we certainly want to have the fit and proper persons. We certainly want to know that these people don't have records, anything that would make them a threat to our students. But I think it would be a good idea to have some, even if it's not there now, built into the legislation, some regulation for that type of person. What we have now, it doesn't fit neatly, because as I said, they're the kinds of qualifications that the bill currently asks for, they wouldn't have. What do they have? They're coaches with a coaching certificate who are going to join you for a few hours a week. But we certainly want the character piece, the fit and proper person qualification accounted for. So my answer is yes, there should be something. It's not there in the bill that would cover them, coaches.
Can I just add to, I think most of us are aware of the focus on things like safe places, and in that regard, I believe that even though they may not need to be registered in certain ways, I would support the notion that there needs to be something built in so that those who are going to be exposed to students who are in the process of formal education as understood by the ministry and exercised by the churches and the government schools, that there should be some way in which they are covered so that we have the necessary safeguard and protection.
So moving just to another question, in the past, the question of the fact that the council or that new entity will be able to do professional evaluation. Is that the professional evaluation? Conduct appraisals. Appraisals, sorry. And there was some disquiet as to whether that is going to overflow, mix up with the board's prerogative. I think 71M. I take the view that they are two separate things. I mean, evaluation that the board and the principal does is in relation to performance on the job. The 71M is talking about, I think, the general standards that a teacher ought to meet, maybe subject knowledge, whatever that can be done. But do you find that that could be a problem? Others have said it is, but I just want to know what your views are.
I certainly think it could be a problem. I think that I remember one of the things that struck me when I first read the bill was that one of the functions of the council would be to regulate the practice of teaching. And it left me uncomfortable for this reason. That, as far as I'm concerned, is the role of the school board. What teaching approaches and what strategies and what that practice looks like, ought to be controlled by the management of the school. I was particularly uncomfortable with it because I guess in my own professional experience, I have seen where fads in education and, you know, something that is catching on like wildfire in another part of the world becomes something that they're saying you must do. And only a strong principal and board says, no, we're not doing that in this school. This is how we will approach it. So it bothered me that central regulating the practice of teaching as distinct from regulating what are the requirements for a licensed teacher and a registered teacher, to me, was taking the place of a function of the board. And the same thing with the appraisal process.
The question of, of course, there are school boards that are strong, and there are some that are not strong. There are some management of schools that are not particularly strong either. So the question, is it not conceivable that you could have a situation where a teacher may not have, although he or she, and I always like to use myself as a teacher, nobody else. So I am the teacher, I am teaching maths, but I'm really trying a thing. And I'm teaching there for a while, and for whatever reason, I'm permitted to teach maths. I don't get any particular good results, but I teach maths. In that situation, shouldn't the regulator be able to say that, generally speaking, when it comes to Brigham, his knowledge of maths is woeful, and he should not be in the system?
And I believe that's what the bill says. And we're happy about that. That under the bill, if I'm understanding it right, you, Graham, wouldn't be teaching any maths. You'd be in trouble.
Yes. Anywhere. But if you're a geography teacher.
And I, as principal, I cannot deploy you to teach math because I'm in trouble.
But understand, though, I may have paper qualifications that say that I am a maths teacher. I have paper qualifications.
You're a maths teacher in progress. So you're coming for me to coach you and you will learn while we're at school and all of this.
So the question I'm asking, though, that's you. But isn't there a role for the regulator to say, notwithstanding the fact that Brigham has a certificate in maths teaching, He's no maths teacher. He doesn't know enough maths.
No.
Therefore, he shouldn't be teaching.
No.
You think that should be left to the principal only?
That's right. The school, it is the job of the educational leader and the management to assess Graham, to continue to assess him, to see what else needs to be done. If Graham does not step up to the plate after our interventions, then perhaps we have to part ways. But that is a function of the management of the school.
Thank you.
But just a follow-up, Chair, because that was a very interesting scenario. So as the principal, you would be able to assess Braham to say, okay, you are not qualified or suitable to continue teaching, but then Braham now goes to another school to teach maths.
Well, Braham...
How do you prevent this Braham from going around and creating havoc?
Braham is in possession of his certification. Braham's certification says, I have been trained. How he performs in the classroom, which is unacceptable to me. Remember, I believe again the bill says, if I have parted ways with him, they need to know. Am I right?
Yes.
When Mr. Braham goes to Mr. Brown's school, well, he don't like him, so he's not rehiring. Right, that goes with them, right? So the issue of what were his shortcomings, because this is one of the things that I believe the bill is going to enrich the system with that being able to know. So somebody doesn't just leave me under a very dark cloud and reappear somewhere else and just is absorbed.
But then shouldn't the council now have that authority to say, okay, this person has gone to this many schools, this person has been dismissed from this many schools, we are not going to allow him back into the system?
I imagine that eventually would happen.
I think that's where the professional appraisal now would come in. That is referenced in the legislation at this time.
I think that is apart from what is going on in the specific school. Just generally saying this person has been moving around from year to it is clear that something is amiss.
Here, based on not allowing to let Braham loose on the students. Remember the last presentation, there were concerns raised about the first interface of the professional appraiser. In this case, the school should have the right to be the first point of appraisal, to either change Braham's ability or his performance, hoping that he can improve without further letting him loose on the students, rather than making the council being the level of appraisal. Exactly. So it comes back to the school being the first port of appraisal who interface, and Braham, you can sit down, interface with Braham as a teacher to change Braham's ability to improve, right? Because it is really the employer who constantly interface with the employee that should be in a position to do this.
Chairman, one last, should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead. Member.
One last point I wish to make, though. It's the same point. I'm on the same point.
I just wanted to know if school A asks for a reference from school B when a teacher turns up at a new school.
I mean, what is the current situation?
No.
Yeah. What? You're asking what the current situation?
Yes,
when
John leaves JC and goes to Campion. Does Campion ask JC for a reference?
If the principal feel a mind.
Precisely. You're asking me what is the practice. Most principals I know would do that. You're doing your due diligence, but I cannot say to you that that happens in every case.
Mrs. Batson, the question that I am, and the practicality of the situation is that Bishop and their team members are thinking of a particular type of school with strength of support, leadership, management. And what you have said is what applies to those schools. I want to take into account a wider context where that strength may not exist. And I feel that the council should retain the ability to do an assessment of whether a person has certain requisite skills. And I don't think it need to conflict with a good chairman of a board or principal. But that's my view. Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman, can I just respond?
Go ahead.
I think this would raise a question, Minister, in terms of what is the role of the education officer in this teaching council thing? Because at the moment, education officers perform some of that function. So is it that the education officer will no longer be going into the school and checking on that sort of thing, or it's the council that is going to do that? So I think that is some clarification that is needed in terms of the roles, in terms of how the teaching council will function in relation to the Ministry of Education with the education officers and in relation to the classroom.
What I do know with regards to the education officers and their roles going forward, they will continue to perform much in the way that they've been doing, but there's a requirement to upgrade the levels of their job description, their functions, to be less administrative and more to help the schools. When they go in, they're looking at what's happening in the schools, sitting down with principals, teachers, doing a more in-depth looking at the school's plans, ensuring that the school is moving in accordance with the plans that they lay out and so on. So there's a call for the job functions that they perform to be at a higher level than they are right now.
Sorry, Minister, just if I may, just to respond to the practical question, because I understand it perfectly. The weaknesses in governance and in management of our schools, this is a real problem. And I don't know that structuring the council to be a kind of a super, I don't know how to say it, where that becomes the council's responsibility is how we want to go. I know even as churches we've been talking about this. Is the suggestion or the recommendation of regional boards of management something, you know, where we, since people are so hard to find, you find boards that are responsible for more than one school, because it has to be solved at a more local level, it would seem to me, than having it coming from a central authority.
Thank you so much. It looks like we've exhausted all the... I'm sorry, did you have an intervention? Go right ahead.
Yes, Chair, thank you so much. In relation to an issue that Member Braham raised as to where persons who provide the services of, say, coaching services, perhaps the committee could consider including those services under the second schedule based on the definition of teach on page 6. A3 says that teach means to undertake duties in any educational setting to which this act applies that include A3, the services specified in the second schedule which support the delivery of the duties under paragraph A or paragraph 1 or 2. So perhaps the committee could consider and the ministry could consider whether it is appropriate to include those kinds of services in the list in the second schedule. Secondly, Chair, just to indicate that in relation to clause 7(1)J, where the ECC would love some words to be included, to include the ECC in terms of consultation. In the bill, we have these words used on a number of occasions, in consultation with stakeholders in the education sector. And it could also be considered if we put these words at the end of J, 7(1)J, if that would be okay with the ECC.
We didn't say we wanted to be consulted, you know, we wanted to be part of the development of it. So we want to be in the discussions with everybody else.
The question, though, Minister, the consultation is a good thing. But when you make it a statutory requirement, if you take it too far, it could be very crippling to the activity of the council. Some of these things are better left to policy, because you could well end up being sued left, right, and center because you didn't talk to me. I am a stakeholder, and so on. While I love consultation, it can. That's the point. And anyhow, because I am a stakeholder, I didn't get to be there. I don't think the consultation was sufficient, and all of that. You invited my friend, but you didn't invite me. I think to legislate consultation is a dangerous road.
Thank you, members. Thank you. Let me say thank you to the Ecumenical Education Committee and the Jamaica Council of Churches for your submission and your presentation here this afternoon. You talked through a lot of the areas. We had a lot of questions, and I am sure in our deliberations, well, I know in our deliberations we will again look at the points that you have raised and the interventions that you have made. So I want to thank you so very much.
Madam Chair, before you close these proceedings, Mr. Reid wanted to raise what he thought was an important point. Would you allow him, please?
Sure.
Carol.
Minister, the first schedule, 10.2, at the moment there is a lot of confusion, even with persons who have been senior persons in the ministry in the past and sitting on school boards for many, many years. This has to do with who calls a meeting of the school board. I notice in the first schedule, 10.2, the same wording which was used in the education regulations are the same words which are used in the bill. There's no particular reference as to who calls the meeting of the school board. And the National Council on Education in its training states very clearly that only the chairman can call a meeting of a school board. Up to 2 weeks ago, there was a big argument about this. And so I think it is very, very important that this be included in the bill and it's not left to different types of interpretation.
Mr. Reid, I think based on what you're saying, it is clearly stated who would call this special meeting.
Yes, but not a regular meeting.
So the regular meeting, it says, so the board shall meet, you mean 10.1 then, and not 10.2? So 10.1 says the board shall meet at such times as may be necessary or expedient.
The important thing is who calls the meeting. That is the point I am trying to raise.
Oh, so he wants it to say chairman?
Yes, it should.
Understood.
Yes, because there are different views. National Council says it's only the chairman, but there are other persons with other views.
Sorry, Madam Chair, can I ask him a question based on that? So, the council, you're saying that only the chairman should call a board meeting. Is that what you're saying?
That's what we are instructed by the National Council on Education.
And may I ask your opinion? What if, for example, there is a situation that the rest of the board members and say the principal have an issue with, with the chairman, he can then hold the process, he or she can then hold the process hostage by not calling a meeting, if only that one person can call a meeting?
Yeah, I am not agreeing or disagreeing
right,
with
I just
who
want to make sure I
calls it.
understand.
What I'm saying is it must be stated clearly so that boards can understand. I am telling you what the National Council says in its training, and I'm saying it shouldn't be left to the fancies of different persons.
I completely understand what you're saying, and I'm not asking you to take a side. I just want to make sure that I understand the process as is now, so that when we are deliberating, I know the context.
Right.
So as is now,
only the chairman can call.
So if the problem is the board chairman, he or she can hold the process hostage by not calling a meeting.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you.
And even more than that, anybody could call a meeting of the board if that isn't stated.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, there are provisions in other legislation which allow for special meeting of the board to be called. And maybe that's the solution to your thing, where it says with X number of members of the board petitioning for a meeting. That may be the route to address that issue.
All right. Let me say thank you again to the Ecumenical Education Committee and the Jamaica Council of Churches, as represented by Most Reverend Howard Gregory, Archbishop of the West Indies and Bishop of the Diocese of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, Mrs. Ursula Khan, member of the EEC, Mrs. Grace Baston, Principal, Campion College, and Mr. Radley Reed of the Church United. Thank you once again for your submission. You are free to go. Yes. Okay, we are at the point of any other business. No. All right, so the date of the next meeting is Tuesday, May 17 at 10 a.m., at which time we... Tuesday?
Oh, Madam Chair, 10 a.m. is, if it's any at all possible, not to be 10.
Are there any other dates? All right. Mr. Nash is telling me that there are no other openings between now and then. So we will set the meeting for Tuesday, May 17, 2022 at 10 a.m. with a presentation by Jamaica Teachers Association. If there is an opening, we would definitely advise you. But for the moment, for now, Tuesday, May 17, 2022, at 10 a.m., presentation by Jamaica Teachers Association. May 17, 2022, at 10 a.m. All right. So the meeting of the Joint Select Committee of the Teaching Council Act is now adjourned. Thank you so much.